I tell you, there's a little bit more to get excited about in the cattle business right now than we've had for several months. Um, we're finally, I guess, to give a view up front. Um, we're close to where I thought we should have been at the beginning of the year anyway, which is really good. You know, we started out this year with futures prices, in my mind, over valuing feeder cattle, and then we started to decline prior to coronavirus, and we kind of got towards where I thought we probably should be, and then coronavirus hit while that decline was happening, and it, things just went completely sideways. So uh, we are where we are. Things are improving, um, and I think there's some opportunities out there for several different folks. Uh, here's what we've seen in slaughter cattle prices. Started out the year fairly strong. Would have normally seen those prices continue to increase through the spring months. That didn't happen because of coronavirus. We had a few jumps here and there. Uh, those weren't all necessarily supply and demand uh, oriented. You know, there was a time you can see there in the May June time period. You know, we had a little jump there in prices that go back into early April, and all those things weren't necessarily supply and demand driven, because there was a time when Tyson said we're going to pay this dollar price, you know, like $1.15, you know, try to help these people out, blah blah blah. Well, they were making, you know, it seemed like they were making tons of money. Where they were, they weren't. It doesn't matter. But we have seen some really strong gains in the fed cattle market past several weeks. Last week was a major jump from the previous week. You know, we're looking at $4 or $5 a hundredweight, and I'm not going to say that we're going to see another $4 or $5 a hundred this week, but any type of $1 or $2, $3 increase over the next several weeks is going to put us in a lot better situation. A lot of feedlots are fixing to start turning some small profits. I don't really care what a whole lot of people say, but the cattle feeding business is a small margin business. The packing business is a small margin business. When you look at those two businesses over the long run, for them, it's mainly about running volume. Small margins at large volumes is what makes money. Actually, you know, you could look at a lot of these large elevators, or a lot of elevators in the grain business, and a lot of them are actually small margin per unit of output, but they try to do a lot of output, so then that makes those numbers look really big. So that's what we're looking at. Okay, so there's, for the audience that's listening, and for those that are producers and those that are folks that I work with every day in extension, there's multiple things to be looking at here, because we're going to have a lot of cow-calf producers that are going to be looking to sell cattle this fall, because the fall run of cattle is, I mean, it's right up on it's fixing to happen. As soon as September hits, you'll start to see some of these spring-born calves start to come to market, people trying to get rid of them early to capture a fairly decent price in September. And then as more and more of those animals roll in October and November, you know, the numbers get really high. Generally, depresses prices somewhat. But this year, I don't think we're going to see that same price depression like we have seen in many other years. You can look at last year from essentially June through the end of the year, and you can see where prices just didn't have a huge range if you're looking at that dotted line there. And you can go, and if you go back and you throw out that late March time period, you can see where these 5 to 6 weight steers in the state have just been pretty steady. I mean, there's it's up this week, down next week, whatever it is, but I just don't think we're going to see that same decline moving forward that we would normally see, because we never got to higher prices. We never got the higher prices that we would have expected in the spring for these lightweight cattle. What this does mean is that there's some stocker producers out there who bought cattle in the spring that are now being able to sell some of those yearling type cattle, because the yearling market has started to improve. This is just the weekly auction on the 7 and 8 weights. So this doesn't represent load lot type cattle, but it still shows the general direction of where 7 and 8 weight cattle are moving. And so we had a bunch of those cattle that were bought as 5 weights back in the spring that should turn pretty significant profits right now. I mean, we're talking about August, September, October will be big time sales for those cattle that were bought back in March, April, and May. And so as we go through August, September, and early October, we should see some easily, $100, $150, $200, maybe even more than $200 type profits on some of those cattle. So that value of gain, just what we thought the value of gain was going to be during the time of purchasing those animals was rather low, but now it's looking really, really strong. And then given the information that Aaron's passed on, we've had relatively steady feed prices. There's no reason to think feed prices are going to escalate a whole lot. And, we've just turning really good profits on those animals right now. This is the highlight for most cow-calf producers throughout this year. Even though we've been tore up by the calf market, and spring calf prices were not very high, so we weren't making much money there. The market that has really supported cash flow, keeping people running, the ability to actually do something were these slaughter cows. And I've been encouraging people to sell since probably March. Sure, there was a week here or there that you would have been better off selling versus the other week. But when you're over 60 cents on a cull cow, a cow that's got bad feet, bad udder, bad mouth, she's old, she's a poor producer. I mean, I'm even encouraging people to market cows that are poor producers. She may be a 5-year-old cow, so she should be in her prime, but she produces a poor calf. Well, there's a lot of cows that produce a better calf, so get rid of them now, immediately. I think there's some people that would benefit greatly from early weaning calves right now. Just go ahead and wean those calves. I don't care if they're 350, 400 pounds. Pull them off. Use whatever you would use to feed that cow. Get rid of the cow. Keep the calves a while longer. Put some more weight on them. But, capitalize on this 60 cent per hundredweight cow price, because you take a 1,200-pound cow and she's worth more than her calf is at 500 pounds, or is worth as much. So, you think about that. Might be a year to keep heifers and get some younger animals in the herd that might be more productive. Here's where things really get down to what is driving this market. Heifer and steer slaughter are down 4% and 6% for the year so far. Beef cows are up 3.4%. The main reason why we're down in heifer and steer slaughter is because of the time period when we had facilities closing, or not completely closing, but reducing the number of shifts that they were operating because they were increasing the amount of cleaning they were doing, or they were altering lines to social distance more, or put in protective equipment. And the slaughter, in reality, the past several weeks, past couple of months, has been pretty much on par with year-ago slaughter levels. Well, there's dress weights. Let me come back to that here in a second. But here's steer slaughter. I mean, you can see where the past couple of months have been very much on par with year-ago levels. And I know that there were a lot of reports about 1 million head of cattle. We were behind on slaughter. We're behind on slaughter. We're behind on slaughter. Well, in reality, you can see that through the dress weights that yeah, we were behind on slaughter. We were behind on slaughter. But we never had our seasonal decline because we were keeping these cattle on feed so much longer, so much longer. That's the heifer dress weight. Here's the steer dress weight. And now we're back into this where we're going to start seeing these weights start to increase. But I do think we're catching up on these cattle. I don't think these cattle are not staying on feed 210 days anymore. If they're on feed 180, then we're ready to pull them off. And I think a lot of that's because we kept a lot of cattle out of the feedlots. So we don't have them backed up in the feedlots as bad as what some people say, because we just never sent them all to the feedlots. There's still a lot of cattle out there in the country that never got sent. Will they overload the market? I very seriously doubt it. I mean, we're starting to see strong sales because of the strong prices. But these increased weights are leading to increased production. There's your beef cow slaughter, very, very strong, and that's because of those prices. But my point in this is we've got pretty much normal slaughter now. We got heavier weights, which is going to increase production. For the year, we're down on beef production. Well, that's because of that time of decreased slaughter. We'll overtake beef production from a year ago at some point. It may be at the end it may be at the end of the third quarter. It may be in the middle of the fourth quarter, but beef production will be above year ago more than likely. Pork production is extremely strong. Aaron was talking about the storm that went through Iowa and those places. Sure, there were pork facilities that were impacted by, or hog facilities impacted by those storms, but it's not gonna tear us up too bad. But we still have a lot of meat on this market, just a lot of meat. Started out the year very, very strong in beef production. Again, coronavirus hit. I wish I could stop saying the word coronavirus or hearing COVID-19. I'm about tired of that word. That's just a mess. People ought to get over it. But hey, it makes for good press, right? If you want to be read, just write that in there. Tell them how great it's going to be. But beef production is above year ago levels as we speak. In the past couple of months, it has been, and a lot of that has to do with those weights. Pork production is just up because we got a lot of animals. We have a lot of animals. We keep on farrowing more hogs. Litters keep getting bigger. Survivability keeps improving, and we just got a lot of hogs out there, and they're making a few dollars, so they just keep on expanding. Broiler production, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about. There have been some hits in broiler production. We are starting to see it start to slow down just a little bit because that meat's just not moving like it should move. We also saw an increase in the beef that's graded choice the past several weeks or past several months, mainly because of cattle being on feed longer. The longer you feed them, the better they're going to grade in most cases. Now, that doesn't mean it was worth feeding them for 200 plus days because it was expensive to feed those cattle, an extra 30 days, extra 45 days, or however long they were fed. But it does increase the quality of the meat, and that's what we have a demand for in this country. It's this trade thing. The beef market is getting soft. Mexico has been the big hit from a beef standpoint. Their economy, Aaron told you about the value of the dollar, and that kind of gives you an idea of what the economy is doing domestically. But Mexico is suffering tremendously. I mean, it's rough. And so, they are a major export destination for us. And actually, in the last month's data, the only country of the top 4 countries that we export, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, Canada, are the main destinations. And Canada, thank goodness for those Canadians, Aaron, because they're the only people that took in more meat in June this year than they did June a year ago. And so they bought more beef than because Japan and South Korea were down, but they were still strong. Last year's exports to Japan and South Korea were extremely, extremely strong. So even though they were down this year compared to year ago levels, still very, very good exports. The whole thing with China, we send a lot of beef to Hong Kong. China likes to say Hong Kong is theirs. Hong Kong would say they're not part of China. Who knows? It doesn't matter. We're just trying to send beef, and whoever buys it, it doesn't matter. We just want to send beef. And China has a strong demand for meat right now. They have been supporting the domestic pork market tremendously. Load after load, shipload after shipload of pork. And so they're really pulling pork off the market, which in essence helps the poultry and beef markets as well. So here our imports are. People might complain about us having imports that are higher. Well, we just continue to import lean grinding beef. We need lean grinding beef, especially since coronavirus. We have less of a pull for the higher quality meats because of the food service industry, the restaurant business. We have more people eating at home, and what people know and like, or what they know how to prepare at home is ground beef products, ground pork products, ground chicken, poultry products. I mean, people know how to fix ground product, or at least that's what they think they know how to fix. So that's why we have such a pull on the lean beef. That's also what is supporting those cull cows that we're selling. The need for that 90% lean beef, mixing in the 50s from the fat cattle, gonna keep that grind product in good shape. Here you can see that decline that we've had in exports. It looks tough right now. It looks really rough. We'll see if it can recover. It'll only recover as those economies recover. And yeah, as you can see here, I think South Korea and Japan will bounce back. They will probably tend to bounce back faster than other places. You know, these smaller countries do seem to have an ability to bounce back because they can get control of things a whole lot quicker. And they're very strong economies to begin with. And so hopefully they will bounce back and we'll start sending lots of product to those countries. Boxed beef prices, you can see where the spike happened. Unprecedented prices. You know, 250 would have been the record. 250, 260 type area would have been the record for those prices prior to coronavirus. And then you say, oh, they're getting $4.50 a pound all of a sudden, and they're buying cattle for less than $1, and man, they're making all kinds of money, but yet they're only killing half as many animals, so they're not really making as much money as people thought. But you know, this is just supply and demand at work. The supply was not available of beef products, so things were strong, but things have leveled right back out. They're below year-ago prices. Packers are still making good money because they're still getting cattle bought fairly cheap. They're running at full capacity for the most part. I say full capacity, maybe not full plant capacity, but it's the same capacity they were running prior to coronavirus. And so things are looking up. They're running some Saturday kills, which is helping the market. Here's the situation that we're in. When I talk to my compadres across the country, you know, this drought in the West is really starting to take a toll on some operations, especially some cow-calf operations. And there are some people that are starting to thin their herds a little bit because of the drought situation. When you get into the four corner states, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, was it Utah? Yeah, Utah. I mean, we're talking about some pretty severe drought in those areas. Forage conditions are poor, and then you look at the southeast, and well, every place east of the Mississippi or east of the 110th meridian or whatever it is. You know, take essentially the Texas Panhandle or the Texas Panhandle and the Oklahoma Panhandle and come back east. Things are in pretty good condition. And I think most of us realize that the forage conditions are in really good situation, but we're only about 2 weeks from a drought at any point this time of year. But you can see, based off the U.S. range and pasture conditions that are percent poor and very poor, that since early June, things have just gotten really, really bad. And that's all been in the western part of the United States. Some of those places are dealing with fires right now, and that's going to just continue to get worse. Great Plains, rough situation. Southern Plains, pretty much on par. Looking like they have good moisture for wheat pasture this year. Was talking with some folks in Oklahoma and Texas recently, I guess last week, and they said wheat pasture, subsoil moisture for wheat pasture is looking good to get wheat in early, so that should support those calf prices a little bit come this fall. We're really good in the southeast region. I'm not going to talk about corn prices because Aaron's already talked about corn prices. the thing is we got sub $3 corn in a lot of feeding country. That means cheap cost of gain for the most part. And this just shows in Kansas where we have had cheap gain. Feeding costs, this is more than just feeding costs, but we're around 82, 83 cents on cattle that came off feed in June. It is very cheap to feed cattle right now. Moving into what the futures market is looking like. This is November. We've had a really strong market. If we look from where we bottomed out back in late March, early April, we have really escalated on the futures market. We're not to the contract highs because we're still $10, $12 below the contract highs, which occurred back in January. But these are profitable prices for most people. And I think there's some opportunities to do some pricing. I've been talking with some people on using some futures and options for November sales. And I think there have been some opportunities presented to lock in some good profits. If it cost you a couple dollars, maybe cost you $10 a head to ensure that you're going to make $150 or $200 a head. That's not a bad deal. That's a positive thing. Moving into January, same situation. We've got people that'll be wanting to sell yearling cattle in January. They'll defer until the first of the year to sell those yearling cattle. Again, really, really strong market. I think there's some opportunities there also. So here's some quick price projections on fed cattle moving forward. I think the fourth quarter, I've got 108 to 112 here. I do think there's a possibility that we could get a little higher than that in a few weeks. Now, this is just an average over the fourth quarter. So I'm expecting the average to hit around 110, 111. But I do think there's some weeks that we may, we'll see these prices maybe as high as 116 moving in sometime in the fourth quarter. Let me back up a second. I messed up. Looking at first quarter and second quarter of next year, I think we're going to have a strong year. I mean, we can't outguess a Tyson fire. We can't outguess some type of disease going across the entire world and impacting a large population. We can't outguess those things, but based off of what the market is saying right now, I think that's where we'll be. Here's kind of what I think is going to happen from October through March on 7 to 8 weight load lot steers and heifers, and then 5 to 6 weight steers going through auction markets. I think this is a very favorable outlook for the market. Some people may disagree, but this is what I think is going to happen. If you're not making money at these prices, then we may need to consider some alternatives in your cost structure.